in communication directly with God. And then there are other things such as neo-paganism, which involves a certain element of mysticism. It's actually going back to the shaman, basically. Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, is a set of esoteric teachings based on the tree of life, basically. And much of the Kabbalist beliefs, particularly in the tree of life, correlate very interestingly to some of the chakras of Indian Hindu belief. The 7 chakras in the body correlate to the 7 sort of branches of the tree of life in the Kabbalah. It's fascinating how it connects. And we talked about Sufism, which is the mystical aspect of Islam. Yoga in Hindu, and as I mentioned, the Tantra and chakras and those kinds of belief systems that are native to Hinduism. Buddhism does have a mystical aspect, although the Buddha himself was not a practitioner of mysticism per se. But the idea of sudden insight, of wisdom achieved directly, correlates kind of with Gnosticism. And then, of course, we have what you might call a secularization of mysticism, taking mysticism out of any particular religious belief system and just using mysticism itself as the practice. And that's kind of what we do in modern times. So we talked about the different kinds of mystical experiences that one might have. Very fascinating. There's a book upon which a lot of this information is based. It's an old book. It's a classic study, but it has really not been replicated and serves as the basis for much of explorations of religions today. Everybody from Joseph. I hate it when names leave my brain. Anyway, William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience is the name of the book. And it was written, he wrote this in the 19th century, I believe. But it still serves as a strong basis for the study of religious belief and mystical belief that continues today. So mysticism, that was one of our top 5 topics in our shows last year. The next was the rising or the rise of the NR, as it's called. So we talk about this a lot on the show, and as I mentioned, talk about how spirituality and religion are not only not the same thing, they can also be in direct conflict with one another. And in 2012, the Pew Foundation did a survey and found that almost 20% of Americans place themselves in the category of spiritual but not religious. Or in the case of the Pew Foundation survey, it was put under the heading of unaffiliated. And we talked about a gentleman by the name of Sam Harris, a self-proclaimed new atheist, who after having written his book on atheism, after 10 years later, began another book called Waking Up, in which he begins to discover his own personal spirituality. And I talked about the fact that for many people, I believe, atheism is the first step towards really beginning to be able to explore your personal spirituality. Because what atheism does is it negates all of the things that have authority figures, whether it be your parents or church members or what have you. And once you're able to let go of that, you're then able to explore your spirituality in your own way as those spiritual experiences happen to you. And this is what happened with Mr. Sam Harris. Not everybody has to go through the atheism phase because, myself among them, who, you know what? Now that I think about it, I did go through an atheism phase as a child. I can remember that. But I also can remember around me, and that has never gone away. So I think what happens as people disconnect from those, I will say, and I don't want to trample on anyone's belief system, but I will say, once they disconnect from beliefs that are limiting, perhaps, or may just be confining or just not helpful in a person's personal growth, once they are able to let go of those and they are able to discover what I talk about often on this show, which is the fact that spirituality is an aspect of being human. We all have a spiritual nature, and that is backed up by science, by the fact that they have discovered a gene called the VMAT2 gene, which is the gene that predisposes us to transcendent thought, if you will, to mystical experiences, to that feeling of connectedness with all. So we all have this to varying degrees, depending upon how that gene is placed in your DNA. Some have greater amounts of it than others, apparently, or different versions of it. So it could be that it's a slow awakening, as it seems to have been for Mr. Harris. It can be that you completely reject it, that you just deny its existence. That's another way that you deal with it. Or other people deal with it by turning it over to organized religion, or a conventional, or at least a mainstream perspective. And some people do that because it's easier than having to think about it yourself, to experience it yourself, to not have to worry about it and just be told what everything means. Well, that's a lot less taxing for some people. So that was in 2012 when the Pew research team found that. Now, in 2017, now another group known as the Public Religion Research Institute, or PRRI, did another survey. And in this survey, they found that, and they surveyed, looks like, 2,000 American adults, and they found that 18% of Americans identify as spiritual but not religious. So still about the same as the Pew research around 20%, give or take. And this is contrasted with 31% of Americans that identify neither as spiritual or religious. So these people that identify that way tend to be younger skewing and tend to be college educated. They tend to be more liberal politically. And what they did was to create separate categories for religiosity and spirituality. And they created indexes for both. And participants who scored highly on the religiosity index, that has to do with organized religion, they frequently attended worship services and reported that they considered religion to be an important factor in their personal lives. And participants who scored highly on the spirituality index reported feeling a connectedness to something much larger than themselves, and felt particularly connected to the world around them and to a higher purpose. The study found that many spiritual but not religious Americans maintain a connection to some sort of organized faith tradition, even if they don't practice it. So just 3 in 10 religiously unaffiliated Americans ranked as spiritual but not religious, suggesting that most spiritual but not religious Americans maintain links with a more formal religious identity. The largest groups of these identify as mainline Protestant or Catholic. So there is some overlap with people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. But I do believe that, and we're going to explore this topic again since it was a popular one and there's more to talk about. But I do believe that it does take a disconnecting from traditional religious belief systems in order for you to explore that. Okay, so that's on my list of topics we shall investigate in 2018. Next in popularity is meta-mindfulness. So we talked about mindfulness a lot on the show. It's a very popular, it's really gone mainstream. Mindfulness meditation, that's the meditation of open attention on the present, without judgment, observing feelings as they go up and down, very much as the Buddha did. And I talk about meta-mindfulness in that meta-mindfulness is a higher level of mindfulness. In other words, as you begin to do it, you begin to find yourself expanding in a way. That's the best way I can put it. Where you're not only noticing what's going on with you, but you're noticing what's going on around you in a way that's completely different, where you're not judging it. And some say that in meta mindfulness, you can do things like increase your healing ability. You know, and we've talked about accessing the relaxation response to trigger healing. Well, you certainly can do that much more effectively through mindfulness. Exploring your psychic development. As you begin to have more solid mindfulness practice, you can then go to the next level and start exploring psychic connections. You can start thinking about what you manifest in the world. All of those things. But I want to just kind of caution about that and say that that is not the goal of mindfulness. What makes mindfulness work is that there isn't any goal. There isn't any striving. In fact, mindfulness is to do the opposite of that. Is to let go of any striving of anything and just to be. So to kind of use mindfulness to kind of achieve